So this is the 7th now in our series on Christian basics, and this one is on Christian behavior. And I've subtitled it The Most Beautiful Algorithm, and you'll realize why once I get talking. The scriptures for this morning are from Matthew chapter 7. This is, of course, the golden rule, and it reads, "So in everything, do to others what you would want them to do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." And then from the Gospel according to Luke in chapter 10 in the 27th verse, he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." This is the word of the Lord. So I want to talk about Christian behavior, and I want to talk about how we can use the golden rule to modify our behavior, to control our behavior, to choose the right kind of behavior. And I want us to think of the golden rule as an algorithm. An algorithm, as you may know, is a pattern of actions or steps that you take in order to accomplish something. It may have inputs or data that it works with, and it has outputs or results that come from it. A computer program is the kind of thing we mostly think of when we speak about an algorithm, but an algorithm is also a mathematical object, and it can be something that you have in math even without it being a program for a computer. But the key thing is, it's a sequence of steps that start from some beginning point or other, use some data or other, and produce some outcome or other. And you need to realize that you are full of algorithms, that your thoughts, that your feelings, that what goes on in your head, that the stuff in your brain is full of algorithms, not just dozens, not just hundreds, but thousands and thousands of them. They aren't necessarily all running at once, but they're all there. A lot of what you think of as yourself is composed of algorithms in your mind or in your feelings. We get them from our parents' influence. How to go potty is an algorithm. It's a set of instructions. It starts with the way you feel, and it ends with coming out of the bathroom and your parents being happy with you. How to eat at the table, how to wash the dishes, how not to yell at your brother, and how to share the toys. These are all algorithms, instructions that our parents give us, rules for how to behave, as well as the algorithms they don't realize that they're teaching us. Yelling at someone when you're actually afraid that they might hurt themselves. Not telling people why you want them to do something because you just want them to get it done, and you'll tell them about it later. We all actually, by our behavior, create programming patterns, algorithms in the people around us. The way we act affects the way they are and changes the pattern of how they might or might not react. Normally, though, we're more aware of it in situations where we know that teaching is taking place. We know that our experience at school is a matter of creating algorithms. Here's a group of facts, but you have to organize them into a pattern in order for them to be the history of the United States, in order for them to be the reason that the Civil War was fought, in order to understand that the Civil War is behind continuing racism, in order to understand how to do your algebra and geometry and chemistry. All of these are patterns and procedures that we build into our minds. We go to a lot of trouble at school to build thousands of algorithms into the minds of our children. Friends influence us, and we build up algorithms from them too. Patterns of procedure. What are we going to do tonight? I don't know. What do you want to do tonight? I don't know. What do you want to do tonight? What's somebody else doing tonight? Are we all going over to so-and-so's house and playing games? You want to come over here and watch movies? Shall we get in the car and go out for dinner? These things sound like they're just questions, but in fact, they're questions that lead to actions, choices, decisions, and then something that everyone does or doesn't do together. Friends influence us, and they influence us in good ways and bad ways. But some of those influences aren't just for the moment. They build up a pattern of behavior that repeats itself over and over again, even when you're not in the presence of those friends. The businesses we work for create algorithms for us. The customer is always right is an algorithm. Mind you, it's an algorithm that might be too simple, and it might not always be applied universally, and it might have to be juggled with other algorithms like, let's make sure the company doesn't go broke. But business life, work life is full of patterns of things to do, sequences of actions to take, judgments to make in order to decide what to do next. Advertising is an algorithm, and it's designed to get us to do something whether we're paying attention or not. Advertising is designed to work, even if we think we're ignoring it, by putting images into our mind that will lead us to buy or not buy something because of it. News of the world builds algorithms in our mind because we're all part of the world. We hear an event happening and we think, I wouldn't do that if that were me. I would do something different. And when we say that, we're building the possibility of doing something different into our minds. We even do that with movies and books and music. These are all imaginary events, imaginary people, imaginary plots, but even so, we think, I would be a hero if I were in a situation like that. I can be a hero in lesser situations that do come up in my life. I'm going to be a hero, or I'm going to feel sad like this when my parents get old and are ready to die. And I'll be ready to take care of them like this character in that movie that we're watching now. Your mind is already full of all kinds of algorithms, all kinds of patterns of behavior, all kinds of programming patterns. And it all interacts together. It's all going on all the time. You may feel like if you look into your mind, there's only 2 or 3 things going on at a time, but actually there are dozens. And that's dozens from out of hundreds and thousands of things that are there in your mind that can be going on at any given time. It all interacts together. And it interacts in interesting ways. I mean, we all know that in counseling and psychology and psychiatry these days, we use a lot of drugs to help people modify their behavior. But we also use counseling a lot to help people modify their behavior. The drugs seem to act on the hardware, on the way the brain is processing things. And that helps a lot sometimes, but it won't help enough if we don't also get counseling. Counseling is about the programming patterns in our mind. Psychiatric drugs are about the hardware in our brains. It takes both of those together, usually, to help people when they're in psychological difficulties, when they need to change their lives, when they need to overcome addiction, or when they need to escape from relationships that trap them. Now, algorithms can be very, very complicated, or they can be relatively simple. The programming pattern for Windows on your computer is thousands and thousands and thousands of pages long. It would be a gigantic, huge book, like the biggest dictionary you ever saw if you wrote it all out. A great many of the patterns for doing things like selling insurance are really very complicated because you have to know an awful lot of things about an awful lot of different kinds of insurance, about people's life situations, about how people work and what their income is and what it does, about how people feel in order to convince them to buy it. A lot of the things that we do in business and life are composed of very complex algorithms, but there are also simple ones. And the ones we're looking at today are relatively simple. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do unto others what you would want them to do unto you. Now, mind you, a simple algorithm can still produce a very complicated, complex result. There's a thing that you've probably heard of or seen somewhere online. It's called the Mandelbrot Set. It's a mathematical object. This is a picture of it. The Mandelbrot Set is considered to be perhaps the most complicated mathematical object known, because perhaps you've seen one of these videos where if you focus in closer and closer and closer on a smaller and smaller scale, then it turns out that all those little bits have little bits of their own that are complicated in their own ways, and have more little bits that are complicated more and more themselves, until it's almost unbelievably complex. And yet it all comes from a simple algorithm. The algorithm says, look, for any complex number, the next number in the set is equal to the previous number squared plus the original number. And you test that to see whether or not it goes to infinity. And if it does, it's not part of the set. And if it doesn't, then it is. And you could write a computer program that does this stuff that's on the screen in front of you, and it would only be about 600 words long. It's relatively simple. And yet that simple program, because it repeats itself over and over, because the algorithm is recursive, it starts from where it left off. It changes something, and then it changes the thing that it changed, and then it changes the next thing that it changed, until you get a more and more complex object out of the end. A really beautiful algorithm is short, simple, easy to apply, and it can be repeated over and over and over again to create very complex results. This is our algorithm for Christian behavior. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is the first ingredient. So you start by checking whether another person is a neighbor. And you may remember that in Luke, this passage about love your neighbor as yourself is followed by the story of the Good Samaritan. And the Good Samaritan is a story that is designed to illustrate the simplicity of this algorithm. Am I interacting with this other person? If yes, I am interacting with them, then they are a neighbor, and therefore I should proceed to love them. Are they on the road where I am traveling? Would I have to cross the road to get away from them? If so, then I'm interacting with them. They are my neighbor. I should go and pour oil and wine on their wounds and put them up on my donkey and take them to the inn and leave them there to heal. You check whether another person is a neighbor by asking yourself, am I interacting with them? Am I leaving a comment on their social media page? Am I talking to them on the phone? Are we exchanging a chat? Are they in the room with me? Am I passing them on the street and we see one another and have to step aside in order not to hit one another going different ways? Are they part of the traffic pattern on the road? Am I interacting with them? Am I saying something in class that responds to something they said in answer to a question from the teacher? Are they in fact the teacher and I'm one of their students? Am I interacting with them? If so, then they are a neighbor, and we proceed to the next step in the algorithm. To do unto others what you would want them to do to you. Imagine that you are this other person, the one we just identified as a neighbor, whom you are called to love. Ask, what would you, as the other person, want you to do for you as the other person? Ask yourself that. Now, that may take a little work. You may have to poke around in your mind. You may have to think about everything you know about this person. You may have to think about everything you know about what is good or not for people. Because the next step in the algorithm is to check whether that would be a good thing for someone to have done for them. Remember, the first step in the algorithm was love your neighbor as yourself. So you have to check whether what the other person would want would be a good thing for them. After all, you may think to yourself, what would my 8-year-old want me to do for them now that it's Halloween night and they've got a big bag of candy? They would want me to let them eat every bit of it anytime they want. Would that be a good thing for them? Would that be loving? If not, then we have to check that and look for something else and something better to do. So there's a guard on this. Asking what the other person would want you to do for them doesn't just mean do anything they would want. They might want something that's not good for them. So the love your neighbor as yourself is the checkup stage of this algorithm. But if it would be a good thing for someone to have done for them, if yes, then do it. It's a pattern of behavior. It's the algorithm for Christian behavior. And we need to use it over and over again all the time. Do you have a boss who's a pain in the tail, who doesn't always pay attention to what you're doing, who doesn't always understand how hard you're working? Some bosses seem to think that getting angry and fussing at people is the right way to get people to do good work. Probably they're wrong about that most of the time. But if you've got a boss like that, how are you going to interact with them? What are you going to do? The algorithm for Christian behavior says, first, they're definitely a neighbor because I'm interacting with them. They're my boss. Second, suppose I was them. Think of what it would mean to be where they are, who they are, in their position. Is their boss giving them the same trouble they're giving me? Are they trapped by the need to get something done that's almost impossible to do? Is that why they're leaning on me? Are they distracted because their spouse is getting ready to leave them and they can't pay good attention to what they're doing at work? Have they been promoted to a position beyond their abilities so that they're flailing around trying to figure out what to do? It's your job to try to understand who they are, what their situation is, what's going on with them, why they are in the place they're in, and then ask yourself, okay, if I were them, what would I want and need me to do for them? What can I do for them? What can I do that will help? What can I do that will make a difference? Do they need a friendly word, even though they've just given me a pain in the ass job? Do they need to be reminded that I need more training in order to do the thing they've just demanded from me? Do they need me to say, yes, sir, and go away and do it and leave them alone because they've got other troubles of their own? What do they really need? What would they really want? How can I do that? The algorithm can be applied between spouses all the time, over and over. We have to imagine what it's like to be the other person. And the truth of the matter is that that's not necessarily all that easy. It's easy to say, this is what you do. It can be hard to carry it out because even after 40 years of marriage, Linda and I still bump into things that we don't understand or recognize about one another or that surprise us about one another. To put yourself in the thoughts, feelings, mind, and situation of another person in order to understand them is not easy, even when you've known them for a long time. But this is the advantage of our algorithm for Christian behavior, that it can be an iterated algorithm. It can be a recursive algorithm. That is, you can do it over and over and over and over again. And every time you do it, it changes things a little so they get somewhat better. And when you do it again, you don't start from scratch, you start from where you left off. And when you do it again, things get a little better again. And when you do it again, you don't have to go back to scratch. You start from what was produced, what resulted from the last time you did it. and then you go on and do it again. After you've been doing that with another person for 20 or 30 years, the complexity and the beauty of what you can accomplish because you've done this same thing over and over, working on the results each time to get more results, can be just amazing. It can be extraordinary. I remember when Linda and I were early married, I was constantly frustrated because she expected me to be able to read her mind and figure out what she wanted and do it without her telling me. Just, I was supposed to read her mind, and this was ridiculous, I was sure. Sometimes I could guess what she wanted. Sometimes she would tell me what she wanted, but there was no way I could read her mind. But after 40 years of practice, of repeated applications of this simple algorithm, I can read her mind almost a third of the time. Some days I have good days, and it's almost half the time. The repetition of this simple pattern of action over and over, building on the results of the previous repetition of it, can produce extraordinary things, extraordinary buildings, extraordinary relationships, extraordinary common tasks. Once upon a time, some 20,000 people got together and started doing an enormous amount of work to try to arrange for 2 of them to be able to land on the moon. That big, huge, beautiful, incredible task was built out of a whole bunch of smaller, piece by piece, simpler jobs. The simpler jobs were built up into more and more complex pieces, and eventually all the pieces were put together to succeed at landing a man on the moon. This is not just an engineering idea, though. It works for the church, too. How is the church going to change the way we practice politics in this country? Some parts of the church seem to think that the way to do that is to take over the politics and impose their own opinions on everyone else. Other parts of the church think that the most important thing is to undo the polarization so that people actually talk and listen to one another. That is simple to describe, one statement at a time, but incredibly difficult and complex to complete. It will take years and years, but those years and years will be full of doing the same thing over and over again, listening to the other person, trying to understand where they're coming from, identifying what's good in what they say, identifying what's wrong in what they say, using the good to build on, putting yourselves in their places and doing for them what it would be good for us to do for them, what they would want us to do for them if they understood what the good was. You use this algorithm when you're with your friends. What are we going to do? That can be a pattern that goes on over and over again. I don't know how many times when I was a young man and not yet married, not even yet seeing Linda, when my friends and I after work would call one another and say, well, what are you going to do tonight? I don't know. What are you going to do tonight? Well, I don't know. Are we going to go over to Bob's? I don't know. Shall we go to Gary's? Do you want to go out and go to the tavern and have a few beers? Shall we go to someone's house and watch a show? And we'd talk back and forth with messages to one another for half an hour to an hour before anyone figured out what to do. Sometimes what's necessary is to get into the other person's head and figure out what it would be good to do. But there's always that control. Remember, it says, love your neighbor as yourself. You have to check. I mean, if the person says, yeah, let's all go out and get drunk tonight, you might have to say, no, I don't think that's going to be very good for us. But you have to judge and use judgment. Some of us have been teachers, some of us have been students. Using the Christian algorithm for behavior, do unto others what you would want them to do to you, works between teacher and student. if the student is trying to put themselves in the place of the teacher and understand what it would be good for the teacher if you did for them, which doesn't just mean do your assignment and turn it in. It may mean ask some good questions. It may mean point out how the assignment doesn't actually practice the lesson the teacher is teaching. It may mean wondering if the student understands the assignment. It may mean answering questions from the student even when they get to be irritating. It may mean trying the best you can to make your teacher into a better teacher. It may mean, as a teacher, helping your student be a better student, which is a far different thing than helping your student absorb more and more information. That's only one small part of it. Helping your student understand how to think about the information, thinking about what your student really wants from you, which is to be able to learn how to do this for themselves so they don't have to sit here and have somebody else tell them how to do it. And again, it's by repeating this all over and over and over again that we get complex results, that we end up with a church that establishes hospitals all over the world, that we end up with a church that works for how to take care of the poor, of the oppressed, of the homeless, of the hungry. It's by working with this in large groups who do it together with one another and then turn themselves on the world around them to try to save that world, to heal that world, to modify the wickedness and evil in that world. It's in doing all this together that we behave like the children of God should behave, that we act like God's people and act like the people who have Jesus Christ as our Lord. Christian behavior is built on a relatively simple algorithm. It becomes complex because we repeat it over and over again, working each time with the results of the last time we did it, so that we get better and go further and do more. Amen.